My name is Peter Caldwell, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about love, trust, and second chances. 3 months ago, I was sitting in a police station in Hat Yai, Thailand, staring at a photograph that shattered my entire world. The woman in that picture wasn't just the love of my life, she was a professional, and I wasn't her only client. If you think this is just another story about a lonely old fool who got taken for a ride, think again. This is about manipulation so sophisticated, so carefully orchestrated, that it took me 6 months to realize I wasn't living in a romance. I was performing in a play where everyone knew the script except me. It started with a simple invitation. "Peter," she said, her voice like silk over the phone, "I want you to come see me dance tomorrow night. It's a traditional Thai performance, and I've been practicing for months." Her name was Juanita, and at that moment I would have flown to the moon if she'd asked me to. But here's what I didn't know, and what nearly destroyed me. I wasn't the only man she invited. There were 10 others, 10 other middle-aged Western men, all sitting in that same audience, all believing they were the special one, all watching the woman they loved perform what we thought was just for us. Before we go any further into this nightmare, I want you to hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's a warning that could save your life, your money, and your sanity. The dance performance was beautiful. Juanita moved like water across the stage, her silk dress flowing around her like liquid gold. Traditional Thai music filled the air, and lanterns cast dancing shadows across her face. I sat in the third row, my heart pounding with pride. This incredible woman, this goddess, had chosen me. At 57 years old, 3 years after burying my wife Margaret, I thought I'd found my miracle. I remember looking around that audience and seeing other Western men my age, all watching with the same expression I probably had, complete adoration. But I didn't think anything of it then. I was too intoxicated by what I believed was love. After the show, Juanita found me in the crowd. She was still in her costume, slightly breathless, her eyes bright with what I interpreted as excitement to see me. "Did you like it?" she asked, taking my hand. Her fingers were soft and warm, and I could smell jasmine in her hair. "You were magnificent," I told her, and I meant it. Absolutely magnificent. She smiled that smile, the one that would haunt my dreams for months afterwards, and said, "I did it all for you, Peter. Every movement, every gesture. When I was up there dancing, I was thinking only of you." Those words, God, those words felt like a gift from heaven. At my age, after losing Margaret to cancer, after watching her waste away for 2 agonizing years, I never thought I'd feel that kind of connection again. Juanita made me feel young, relevant, alive. We walked through the night market afterward, her arm linked through mine. She pointed out different vendors, taught me a few words in Thai, laughed at my terrible pronunciation. Everything felt perfect, like we were the only two people in the world. "Peter," she said as we shared mango sticky rice from a street cart, "I have something to tell you." My heart stopped. In my experience, nothing good ever followed those words. "My family is in trouble," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My father owes money to some very dangerous people. I didn't want to burden you with this, but I don't know who else to turn to." And there it was, the hook, the moment everything started spiraling toward disaster. But I didn't see it then. All I saw was the woman I loved in distress, and every instinct I had screamed at me to protect her. Let me tell you who Peter Caldwell was before he became a cautionary tale. I was born in Manchester, moved to Toronto when I was 30, built a successful accounting practice, and lived what most people would call a good life. Margaret and I were married for 26 years. We had 2 children, David and Sarah, both grown now with families of their own. Margaret was my anchor. She kept me grounded when work stress threatened to consume me, celebrated my victories, and held me together during my failures. When the doctors told us she had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, our world collapsed in the span of a single afternoon. Watching someone you love die slowly is a special kind of hell. It's not just the physical deterioration, though that's devastating enough. It's watching them apologize for becoming a burden, seeing the fear in their eyes when they think you're not looking, feeling helpless as they slip away piece by piece. Margaret passed on a Tuesday morning in March. I was holding her hand when she drew her last breath, and in that moment I felt something inside me die too. The man who had built a successful business, raised two children, and navigated life with confidence, that man disappeared. The months that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements, legal paperwork, and well-meaning friends telling me I needed to get back out there. David and Sarah worried about me constantly. They'd call every day, sometimes twice, checking to make sure I was eating, sleeping, functioning. "Dad, you can't just sit in that house forever," Sarah would say. "Mom wouldn't want this for you." She was right, of course. Margaret had made me promise during those final weeks that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life mourning her. "Find joy again, Peter," she whispered one night when the morphine made her unusually philosophical. "Promise me you'll find a reason to smile." But how do you rebuild a life at 54? How do you start over when everything that defined you for decades is gone? My friends were all couples, and suddenly I was the odd man out at dinner parties. My house felt like a mausoleum, every room echoing with memories. Work became my escape. I threw myself into client files and tax returns with an intensity that worried my employees. Numbers didn't judge you, didn't require emotional investment, didn't leave you, but eventually even work couldn't fill the void. That's when my brother James suggested the trip to Thailand. "You need to get away, Peter," he said over drinks one evening. "Somewhere completely different, somewhere Margaret never was, so you won't spend the whole time comparing everything to memories." Thailand seemed like another planet compared to Toronto's gray march landscape. James booked me into a resort in Hat Yai. Nothing too fancy, he assured me. Just a place to rest and maybe rediscover some piece of myself I'd lost. The first week was exactly what I needed. I slept late, read books I'd been meaning to get to for years, took long walks on the beach. The Thai people were incredibly kind, and there was something healing about being in a place where nobody knew my story. Nobody looked at me with those pitying eyes I'd grown so tired of back home. I was sitting at the poolside bar on my 8th night there, nursing a beer and watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple, when she walked into my life. Juanita wasn't conventionally beautiful, at least not in the way Western media defines beauty. She was petite, probably in her late 20s, with long black hair that caught the light when she moved, but there was something about her presence, an energy that drew attention without demanding it. She was working behind the bar that night, filling in for someone who'd called in sick. I watched her move with practiced efficiency, mixing drinks and chatting with customers in fluent English. When she got to me, she smiled with genuine warmth. "You're the Canadian gentleman from room 214, she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you—" "I noticed things," she laughed. "It's part of the job. Plus, you've been reading that same book for 3 days. Either it's very good or very confusing." I looked down at the novel in my hands, some thriller I'd picked up at the airport, and realized she was right. I'd been so lost in my own thoughts that I'd barely absorbed a word. "Confusing," I admitted. "Or maybe I'm just distracted. By the sunset, it is beautiful tonight." Among other things. We talked for 2 hours. She told me she was studying English literature at the local university, working part-time at the resort to help pay for her education. I told her about Toronto, about my work, carefully avoiding mention of Margaret or my children. For the first time in months, I felt like just Peter. Not grieving Peter, not lonely Peter, just a man having a conversation with an interesting woman. When her shift ended, she lingered at my table. "Would you like to see the real Thailand tomorrow?" she asked. "Not the tourist version, the place where actual people live and work and dream." I should have said no. I should have recognized that I was vulnerable, that I was in no condition to make rational decisions about attractive young women offering to show me their world. But Margaret's voice echoed in my head. "Find a reason to smile, Peter." "I'd like that very much," I heard myself saying. Juanita picked me up the next morning on a scooter that had definitely seen better days. She wore jeans and a simple white t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked nothing like the polished resort employee from the night before. She looked real, authentic, and absolutely radiant. Hold on tight, she called over the engine noise. Thai traffic is adventurous. The next 8 hours changed my life. Juanita took me through markets I never would have found on my own, introduced me to street food that made my taste buds sing, showed me temples where monks in orange robes moved through their daily rituals with serene purpose. She seemed to know everyone. Vendors called out her name, children waved from doorways, elderly women smiled and nodded as we passed. You're popular, I observed as we shared som tam at a tiny restaurant squeezed between a barber shop and a motorcycle repair garage. I grew up here, she explained. This neighborhood raised me. When my parents died in a car accident 7 years ago, these people became my family. The way she said it, matter of fact, but with underlying sadness, made my chest tighten. Here was someone else who knew loss, who understood what it meant to rebuild your life from the ground up. I'm sorry, I said. That must have been devastating. It was, but grief teaches you things, doesn't it? About strength you didn't know you had, about finding light in dark places. Her English was remarkably sophisticated for someone who'd learned it as a second language, but more than that, her insights were profound. This wasn't just small talk, she was speaking from experience, from genuine understanding of pain and recovery. As the day progressed, I found myself sharing things I hadn't talked about with anyone. Not the full story of Margaret's death, but pieces of it. My confusion about starting over, my guilt about enjoying myself, my fear that the best parts of my life were behind me. Juanita listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, shared her own struggles with losing her parents and trying to build a future on her own. By the time she dropped me back at the resort that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: hope. Thank you, I said as I climbed off the scooter. Today was perfect. It doesn't have to end, she said quietly. I mean, today ends, but this, whatever this is between us, it doesn't have to. The words hung in the tropical air between us. I was 57 years old enough to be her father. I lived on the other side of the world. I was still processing grief that sometimes hit me like a physical blow. Every logical part of my brain screamed that this was temporary vacation insanity, but the part of me that had been dead for a year was suddenly, impossibly, alive again. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that very much. She smiled, and it was like watching sunrise. The next 2 weeks became a blur of discovery. Juanita worked at the resort 3 days a week, attended university 2 days, and spent her free time showing me her world. We explored ancient ruins, swam in hidden waterfalls, ate at family restaurants where she translated menus and ordered dishes she insisted I had to try. But more than the sightseeing, it was the conversations that hooked me. Juanita was brilliant, genuinely brilliant. She could discuss literature, philosophy, politics with an insight that amazed me. She'd grown up poor but educated herself through sheer determination. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, of traveling the world, of making a difference. What about you? She asked one evening as we watched the sunset from a hilltop temple. What are your dreams, Peter? It was a question I hadn't considered in years. During my marriage, my dreams had been simple: provide for my family, build a secure future, grow old with Margaret. After her death, the concept of dreams felt irrelevant. I don't know anymore, I admitted. I used to think I had it all figured out, but now I feel like I'm starting from scratch at an age when most people are finishing up. Maybe that's a gift, Juanita said softly. Most people never get a chance to start over, to discover who they really are underneath all the roles they play. Maybe losing everything is just clearing space for something better. The insight hit me like a revelation. Maybe my life wasn't ending. Maybe it was just beginning. That night, for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt genuinely happy. Not just distracted or momentarily pleased, but deeply, authentically happy. I was falling in love with this remarkable woman, and miracle of miracles, she seemed to be falling in love with me too. Peter, she said as we walked back to her scooter, I have something to ask you, but I'm afraid you'll think I'm being too forward. Ask away, My visa to study abroad was approved, she said, her voice uncertain. I could go to university in Canada, finish my degree there, but I don't know anyone and it's so expensive and I'm scared to go alone. My heart stopped. The possibility of continuing this relationship, of not having to say goodbye at the end of my vacation, was something I'd dreamed about but hadn't dared hope for. That's wonderful news, I said carefully. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that maybe this isn't just a holiday romance, she said, stopping to face me. Maybe it's something real, something worth taking a risk for. Standing there in the warm Thai evening, looking into the eyes of a woman who made me feel alive again, I made a decision that would nearly destroy my life. Come to Toronto, I said. Come home with me. The next month passed like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. Juanita threw herself into preparations for moving to Canada with an enthusiasm that both thrilled and amazed me. She researched universities, practiced her already excellent English, asked me hundreds of questions about Toronto, about Canadian culture, about my life there. I want to fit in, she explained one evening as we pored over immigration documents at her tiny apartment near the university. I don't want to embarrass you in front of your friends and family. The consideration, the thoughtfulness, it all felt so genuine. Here was a woman who cared about making a good impression on people she'd never met, who worried about being worthy of the life I was offering her. My children, predictably, were less than thrilled when I called to tell them about Juanita. Dad, you barely know this woman, Sarah said during our video call. You've known her for what, 3 weeks? Sometimes 3 weeks is enough, I replied, though even as I said it, I could hear how naive it sounded. Is this about Mom? David asked bluntly. Because if you're trying to fill some void, this isn't about your mother. I cut him off, though of course it partially was. Everything was about Margaret, would always be about Margaret. But Juanita wasn't a replacement. She was something entirely new. The kids weren't the only ones with concerns. My brother James, who'd suggested the Thailand trip in the first place, was cautiously supportive but worried. I'm happy you're happy, he said when I told him about my plans to bring Juanita to Toronto. But Peter, she's young, she's from a completely different culture, and let's be honest, you're in a vulnerable place right now. I'm not some doddering old fool being taken advantage of, I snapped. I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. I know you are. I just want to make sure you're making them with your head and not just your heart. But I was past listening to voices of reason. Juanita had awakened something in me I thought was dead forever. When she looked at me, I didn't see a grieving widower struggling to rebuild his life. I saw a man worth loving, worth building a future with. The visa process was more complex than I'd anticipated, but Juanita navigated it with impressive competence. She gathered documents, filled out forms, prepared for interviews with Canadian immigration officials. I helped where I could, including providing financial guarantees and character references. I don't want you to think I'm using you, she said one afternoon as we waited at the immigration office. I know it might look that way to some people. Young Thai woman, older Western man, but what I feel for you is real, Peter. This isn't about convenience or opportunity, it's about love. The sincerity in her voice, the vulnerability in her eyes, it all felt so genuine. And maybe it was in that moment. Maybe Juanita did care for me, did see a future together. Maybe the fact that I was her ticket to a better life was just a happy coincidence rather than the entire point. During those weeks of preparation, I started noticing small things that should have raised red flags. Juanita's phone was constantly buzzing with messages, but she'd quickly silence it or step away to respond. When I asked about it, she'd say it was her university friends or family members checking on her progress. Thai people are very social, she explained. We stay in touch constantly. It's cultural. There were moments when I'd catch her looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not love exactly, but something more calculating. But those moments were fleeting, immediately replaced by the warm, adoring looks I'd grown addicted to. One evening, about a week before she was supposed to fly to Toronto, Juanita seemed unusually quiet during dinner. What's wrong? I asked. I'm nervous, she admitted. About leaving everything I know, about starting over in a foreign country. What if I can't adapt? What if your family never accepts me? What if I disappoint you? Her fear seemed so reasonable, so human. Moving to a new country was terrifying under the best circumstances, let alone when you were following a man you'd known for barely 2 months. You could never disappoint me, I assured her, taking her hands across the table. And my family will love you once they get to know you. How could they not? Promise me something, she said, her eyes unusually serious. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter what challenges we face, we'll face them together. I can handle anything as long as I know you're on my side. I promise, I said without hesitation. We're a team now. Whatever comes, we handle it together. It was a promise that would come back to haunt me in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. The night before her departure, Juanita organized a farewell party with her friends and some of the people from the resort. It was a small gathering at a beachside restaurant, nothing elaborate, but seeing her surrounded by people who clearly cared about her made my heart swell with pride. These were her people, her community, and she was leaving them to build a life with me. The sacrifice felt enormous, and I was determined to make sure she never regretted it. Speech, someone called out, and suddenly all eyes were on me. I stood up, slightly embarrassed but wanting to say something meaningful. I don't speak much Thai, I began, which earned a few chuckles. But I don't need to speak the language to recognize kindness, intelligence, and beauty when I see it. Juanita is all of those things and more. I promise to take good care of her, to help her build the life she dreams of, and to never take for granted the gift she's giving me by trusting me with her future. The applause was warm and genuine, and when I sat back down, Juanita was crying. Happy tears, she whispered, squeezing my hand. I'm just so grateful to have found you. Looking back now, I wonder if those really were happy tears, or if they were something else entirely. But that night, in that moment, surrounded by the warm glow of what felt like communal blessing, I believed we were embarking on the greatest adventure of our lives. I had no idea I was walking into the most sophisticated trap I'd ever encountered. Juanita's arrival in Toronto in late September marked the beginning of what I thought would be the happiest chapter of my life. I'd prepared for months, researching immigration lawyers, finding her a spot in a continuing education program at the University of Toronto, converting Margaret's old sewing room into a study space complete with a desk, computer, and bookshelves. The first weeks were everything I dreamed they would be. Juanita threw herself into Canadian life with the same enthusiasm she'd shown for everything else. She studied English idioms, learned to navigate the subway system, marveled at the autumn colors in High Park. Watching her discover my city through fresh eyes made me fall in love with Toronto all over again. It's so clean, she observed one morning as we walked through the financial district on our way to complete more immigration paperwork. And everyone follows the rules. In Thailand, traffic laws are more like suggestions. Her wonder at mundane things, automatic doors, 24-hour grocery stores, central heating, reminded me not to take the privileges of my life for granted. Through her eyes, I saw abundance where I'd previously seen routine. But it was the private moments that convinced me I'd made the right decision. Juanita would curl up next to me while I watched the news, asking questions about Canadian politics, genuinely interested in understanding her new country. She'd cook Thai meals in my kitchen, teaching me to use ingredients I'd never heard of, turning dinner preparation into cultural exchange. Try this, she'd say, holding out a spoon of some complex curry she'd been working on for hours. Too spicy? Not spicy enough? She seemed to care deeply about making me happy, about proving herself worthy of the life I was providing. When my friends came over for dinner, she'd spend days preparing, worrying about making good impressions, asking me to coach her on topics that might come up in conversation. I want them to see why you chose me, she'd say, and the vulnerability in her voice made my chest tight with protective tenderness. My friends, to their credit, were charmed. Tom and Linda Morrison, my oldest couple friends, pulled me aside after one dinner party to express their approval. She's lovely, Peter, Linda said. So gracious and clearly devoted to you. I think Margaret would approve. That endorsement meant everything to me. If Linda, Margaret's closest friend, could see Juanita as a worthy successor to my late wife's place in my life, then maybe I really had found something special. But somewhere around the third month, things started to shift in ways I initially interpreted as natural adjustment challenges. Juanita began having trouble sleeping. She'd toss and turn beside me, sometimes getting up at 2 or 3 in the morning to pace the house. When I'd ask what was wrong, she'd say she was homesick, worried about her family, struggling with the Canadian winter. "It's so cold," she'd say, shivering even though the house was warm. "And it gets dark so early. In Thailand, even in winter, there's light." I bought her special lamps to combat seasonal depression, turned up the heat, suggested we take a winter vacation somewhere tropical, but nothing seemed to help. Then the phone calls started. At first, they were predictable: friends from home checking in, family members wanting updates on her new life. But gradually, the calls became more frequent and more urgent. Juanita would answer her phone at all hours, speaking rapidly in Thai, her voice tense with worry. "Everything okay?" I'd ask when she'd hang up. "Family problems," she'd say, which was becoming her standard response to any question about her growing anxiety. The first time she asked for money, it seemed reasonable enough. "Peter," she said one evening in November, her eyes red from crying, "I have a problem and I don't know what to do." She explained that her younger brother had been in a motorcycle accident back in Hat Yai. He needed surgery, and the family couldn't afford the medical bills. Thai public health care covered basic treatment, but for the specialized surgery he needed, they had to go private. "How much?" I asked. $3,000, she said, then quickly added, "But I can't ask you for that. It's too much. I'll find another way." $3,000 was significant but not devastating to my finances, and the thought of Juanita's brothers suffering because I was too selfish to help was unbearable. "Of course I'll help," I said. "Family is family." Her gratitude was overwhelming. She cried, kissed me, thanked me in both English and Thai. The money was wired the next day, and within a week she reported that her brother was recovering well. I felt good about helping. This was what partnerships were about: supporting each other through crises, being there when life threw curveballs, but the crises kept coming. In December, it was her aunt who needed help with rent after losing her job. $500, not much in Canadian terms, but apparently a fortune in Thai currency. In January, her childhood friend was getting married and needed help paying for the ceremony. Thai wedding traditions were expensive, Juanita explained, and it would be deeply shameful for her family if they couldn't contribute appropriately. Another $800. In February, there was a family emergency involving her cousin's children. The details were complex and emotional, involving sick grandparents and unpaid school fees, but the solution was simple: $1,200. Each request came with tears, apologies, and promises that this was the last time. Each crisis seemed genuine and urgent, and each time I helped, Juanita's gratitude and affection felt like validation that I was being the partner she needed. "You're saving my family," she'd say, holding me tight after each crisis was resolved. I don't know how I got so lucky to find someone with such a generous heart. By March, I'd sent nearly $7,000 to various family emergencies. It wasn't bankrupting me, but it was becoming a pattern I was starting to notice. "Maybe your family should look into local assistance programs," I suggested after the latest crisis, something involving property taxes and threatened eviction. "You don't understand Thai culture," Juanita replied, and there was an edge to her voice I hadn't heard before. "Family takes care of family. If I don't help them, who will? Would you really want me to be the kind of person who abandons her family when they need her?" She made it sound like a moral test, and I failed every time by ultimately agreeing to help. Because she was right. I wouldn't want to be with someone who turned her back on family in need. And if our situations were reversed, if my children needed help and she was in a position to provide it, I'd want her to step up without hesitation. But late at night, when Juanita was finally asleep beside me, sometimes I'd lie awake wondering if I was being generous or foolish. The answer to that question would nearly destroy everything I'd spent my life building. Spring arrived in Toronto with its usual dramatic flair. One day we were scraping ice off car windshields. The next we were opening windows to let in warm breezes that smelled of possibility. Juanita seemed to come alive with the changing season, her mood lifting in ways that made me believe we'd weathered the worst of her adjustment period. "I want to show you something special," she announced one morning in early May, her eyes bright with excitement. "Something I've been working on for months." She'd been taking traditional Thai dance classes at a cultural center in the city, she explained. It was her way of staying connected to her roots while building a life in Canada. But more than that, she'd been preparing for a special performance, a full traditional dance recital that would showcase everything she'd learned since arriving. "It's this Saturday night," she said, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "Will you come? I want you to see this part of who I am, this piece of my culture that I carry with me." The request filled me with pride. After months of Juanita struggling with homesickness and family crises, seeing her excited about sharing her heritage with me felt like a breakthrough. "Of course I'll be there," I said, pulling her close. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The venue was a small theater in Toronto's Arts District, the kind of intimate space where you could see every expression on the performers' faces. Juanita had reserved me a seat in the third row, close enough to catch every nuance of her performance, she'd said. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, carrying flowers I'd spent 20 minutes selecting at the florist. This felt like a milestone moment in our relationship, a chance for me to fully appreciate an aspect of Juanita's identity that I'd only glimpsed in our private moments. The theater filled slowly with what appeared to be an eclectic mix of people. There were young couples, some families with children, several older individuals like myself. The diversity of the audience seemed appropriate for a cultural performance, the kind of event that would attract people interested in experiencing authentic Thai traditions. But as I settled into my seat, I started noticing something odd. There were quite a few middle-aged Western men scattered throughout the audience, and they all seemed to be alone. They sat with the same expectant expression I probably had, clutching flowers or small gifts, checking their phones frequently. One gentleman, perhaps in his early 60s with silver hair and an expensive watch, was sitting 2 rows ahead of me. He kept glancing around the theater with nervous energy, adjusting his tie, checking his reflection in his phone screen. His behavior struck me as familiar, like a man preparing to see someone very special perform. Another man, younger but probably still in his 50s, sat across the aisle from me. He held a bouquet of roses that looked remarkably similar to the ones I'd brought. Every few minutes, he'd pull out his phone and smile at the screen, then type a quick message. A strange uneasiness began creeping up my spine, but I pushed it down. This was Toronto, a multicultural city where it wasn't unusual to see diverse audiences at cultural events. The fact that several other men my age were here probably just meant that Thai dance was more popular than I'd realized. The lights dimmed and traditional Thai music began to play. The curtain rose to reveal a stage decorated with silk banners and lotus flowers, lotus candles creating pools of golden light. It was beautiful, exotic, professionally done. Then Juanita appeared, and my breath caught. She wore a costume I'd never seen before, layers of gold and crimson silk that caught the stage lights like liquid fire. Her hair was adorned with traditional Thai ornaments, and her makeup transformed her into something ethereal, otherworldly. She moved with a grace that seemed impossible, every gesture precise and meaningful. I was transfixed. This wasn't just the woman I'd fallen in love with. This was an artist, a master of her craft, someone channeling centuries of cultural tradition through her body and soul. But as the performance continued, that strange uneasiness returned, stronger this time. Juanita's movements were beautiful, but there was something about her performance that felt familiar. Not because I'd seen her practice these exact routines, but because the emotional quality of her dancing seemed calibrated, rehearsed in a way that went beyond mere technical preparation. She would make eye contact with different sections of the audience, and each time she did, her expression would shift slightly. When she looked in my direction, her face would soften into the tender, loving expression I knew so well. But when her gaze moved to other parts of the theater, I caught glimpses of that same expression directed elsewhere. During one particularly dramatic sequence, she performed a series of movements that seemed designed to showcase vulnerability and longing. Her eyes swept across the audience, and I watched as several of the middle-aged men I'd noticed earlier leaned forward in their seats, clearly captivated by what they interpreted as personal connection. The performance lasted 45 minutes, and it was undeniably beautiful. When the curtain fell, the audience erupted in enthusiastic applause. I stood with everyone else, clapping until my hands stung, genuinely proud of what I'd witnessed. But underneath that pride was a growing sense that something wasn't quite right. After the show, I waited in the lobby as audience members filtered out. Some left immediately, but others lingered, clearly hoping to meet the performers. I watched as several of those middle-aged men approached other audience members, striking up conversations that seemed awkward and uncertain. "Excuse me," I heard one say to another. "Are you here for Juanita too?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Two? What did he mean, too? I moved closer, pretending to study the theater's program while straining to hear their conversation. "Yes," the second man replied. "She invited me specifically, said it was a special performance she'd been preparing just for me." "She told me the same thing," the first man said, his voice confused and uncertain. "How do you know her?" As I listened to their exchange, my world started tilting on its axis. These men were talking about Juanita the way I thought about Juanita, as someone special, someone who had personally invited them to witness her art. Before I could process what I was hearing, Juanita appeared in the lobby, still in her performance costume but with a silk shawl draped over her shoulders. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting compliments and thanks from various audience members. But it was her interactions with those middle-aged Western men that made my blood run cold. With each one, she had a brief private conversation that looked remarkably like the conversation she'd had with me over the past 8 months. The same intimate body language, the same grateful expressions, the same way of making each person feel like they were the only one who mattered. I watched her approach the silver-haired gentleman from 2 rows ahead of me, and even from across the lobby I could see her transform. Her posture became more delicate, her smile more personal. She accepted his flowers with the same gracious surprise she'd shown when I brought her gifts. Then she moved to the man with the roses, and the performance repeated. Same gestures, same expressions, same carefully calibrated charm. When she finally spotted me across the lobby, she lit up with what I'd always interpreted as genuine joy at seeing me. She excused herself from whoever she'd been talking to and glided toward me with arms outstretched. "Peter!" she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. "You came. Did you like it? Was it everything I promised?" Up close, I could see tiny details I'd missed from my seat. The precise application of her makeup, the professional quality of her costume, the way she seemed slightly out of breath not from the performance but from the social demands of working the crowd. "It was beautiful," I said, and I meant it. Truly beautiful. But even as I said the words, even as I accepted her kiss and returned her embrace, a terrible understanding was beginning to crystallize in my mind. This wasn't just a cultural performance, this was something else entirely. And I wasn't the only man in that theater who thought he was special. I want you to pause for a moment and really think about this. Have any of your friends or relatives ever fallen for something like this? Have you ever watched someone you care about get manipulated so skillfully that they couldn't see what was happening right in front of them? Leave a comment and let me know, because what I'm about to tell you might sound impossible, but I promise you it happens more often than you think. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to take a turn that will change everything you think you know about love and deception. The drive home from the theater was surreal. Juanita chattered excitedly about the performance, pointing out technical details I'd missed, explaining the cultural significance of different movements. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, and part of me wanted to dismiss what I'd observed as paranoid imagination. "Did you see how many people came?" she asked, adjusting the rearview mirror to fix her makeup. I was so nervous that no one would show up, but the theater was almost full. Yes, I said carefully. I noticed there were quite a few older gentlemen in the audience. Oh, that's because of the cultural center, she replied without missing a beat. They have a mailing list of people interested in authentic cultural experiences. Lots of retired men with time and interest in learning about different traditions. Her explanation was smooth, plausible, delivered with just the right amount of casual dismissal. If I hadn't been specifically looking for deception, I might have accepted it without question. But I was looking now. And once you start looking, you see things everywhere. Over the next few days, I began paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. Juanita's phone habits, her explanations for where she went during the day, the timing of her various family crises, even the way she responded to questions about her past. I started with simple internet searches. Juanita was a common Thai name, so that didn't yield much useful information. But when I searched Thai Cultural Performances Toronto, I found several listings for the same cultural center Juanita had mentioned. They did indeed host regular performances, and they did maintain mailing lists for interested patrons. But they also offered something else: private cultural education sessions for individuals seeking authentic Thai cultural experiences. The language on their website was carefully neutral, but something about it made my skin crawl. I created a fake email account and sent an inquiry about private Thai dance instruction. The response came within hours, professionally written but with undertones that suggested this was about more than just learning traditional choreography. Our instructors are carefully selected for their cultural expertise and personal warmth, the reply read. We specialize in creating meaningful connections between our clients and authentic Thai traditions. Each session is personally tailored to the individual's needs and interests. The word connections seemed to vibrate off the screen, but it was when I hired a private investigator that the full scope of what I'd walked into became clear. Martin Kowalski was a retired Toronto police detective who specialized in fraud and identity theft cases. I found him through a legal firm I'd done accounting work for, and his initial consultation fee was reasonable enough that I could justify it as due diligence. I want to know about someone, I told him during our first meeting. Background check, financial history, any red flags I should be aware of. Martin was in his late 50s, gray-haired and serious, with the kind of world-weary expression that suggested he'd seen every type of human deception imaginable. Girlfriend? He asked, making notes in a leather portfolio. Fiancé, actually. We're planning to get married this summer. And something's making you nervous. I told him about the performance, about the other men, about my growing sense that things weren't quite what they seemed. Martin listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions and taking detailed notes. How long has she been in Canada? He asked. About 8 months. And how much money would you estimate you've given her or spent on her behalf? The question made me uncomfortable, partly because I'd never actually added it up. Maybe $10,000 or $12,000, family emergencies, mostly. Martin's expression didn't change, but he made a note that looked more significant than the others. I'll need a few days, he said. Full name, date of birth if you have it, any documentation you might have from the immigration process. 3 days later, Martin called and asked me to come to his office immediately. You're going to want to sit down for this, he said when I arrived. The file he placed in front of me was thick and professionally organized, with tabs separating different types of information. The first section contained basic biographical data that confirmed most of what Juanita had told me about her background. She was indeed from Hat Yai, had indeed lost her parents in a car accident, had indeed attended university. But the second section revealed information that made my hands shake. Her real name is Juanita Prukkum, Martin said, but she's used at least 4 other variations of that name in official documents. She's been in Canada not for 8 months, but for 3 years, and she's been married twice during that time. The photographs in the file showed Juanita in wedding attire with 2 different men, both middle-aged Westerners, both old enough to be her father. The marriage certificates were dated 18 months apart. Both marriages were dissolved for irreconcilable differences, Martin continued. But in both cases, the men involved filed financial complaints with local authorities. Nothing criminal was ever proven, but the pattern is consistent. What pattern? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. Romance fraud, specifically targeting recently widowed or divorced men over 50. The methodology is sophisticated. Cultural performances to build legitimacy, manufactured family crises to justify financial requests, carefully managed emotional manipulation to maintain control. Martin opened another section of the file. The cultural center you mentioned? It's legitimate, but it's also been investigated twice by immigration authorities for facilitating relationships between Thai women and Western men that appear primarily transactional. How many men? I asked. Based on social media profiles and witness statements, at least 12 in the Toronto area alone, probably more who haven't been identified. The room felt like it was spinning. Every memory I had with Juanita suddenly looked different. Not moments of genuine connection, but performances calibrated to keep me hooked and paying. The dance performance, I said. Were there really 10 other men there who thought they were special? 11, Martin corrected. I interviewed 3 of them. They all received personal invitations, all believed the performance was specifically for them, all have been providing financial support for various family emergencies. How much? One gentleman has given her over $30,000 in the past 6 months. Another refinanced his house to help with what she claimed was a family medical crisis. I stared at the photographs of Juanita with her previous husbands, trying to reconcile the woman I'd fallen in love with the calculating predator described in Martin's report. There's more, Martin said gently. The family emergencies, the brother's motorcycle accident, the aunt's rent problems, none of it checks out. I have contacts in Hat Yai who confirm that no one matching the descriptions of her family members exists at the addresses she provided. The room went very quiet. Outside Martin's office window, Toronto was going about its normal Tuesday afternoon business. People walking dogs, heading to meetings, living honest lives built on genuine relationships. What do I do now? I asked. That depends, Martin said. Do you want to pursue criminal charges, or do you just want this to stop? I thought about Juanita at home in my house, probably preparing dinner, maybe planning the next family crisis that would require my financial intervention. I thought about the months of believing I'd found love again, of introducing her to my friends, of planning a future together. I want to confront her, I said. I want to hear her explain this. Martin shook his head. That's not advisable. People who operate at this level of sophistication don't break character easily. She'll have explanations for everything, and some of them might even be partially true. You'll end up more confused than you are now. Then what? You document everything, you protect your assets, and you get her out of your life as cleanly as possible. If you're lucky, she'll move on to the next target without causing additional damage. And if I'm not lucky? Martin's expression was grim. Then things get much worse before they get better. I drove home from Martin's office in a trance, my mind cycling through 8 months of memories that now felt like elaborate lies. Every tender moment, every crisis, every declaration of love, all of it had been carefully orchestrated to separate me from my money and my sanity. The house was warm and filled with the smell of Thai curry when I walked in. Juanita was in the kitchen wearing an apron over a summer dress, her hair pulled back in the casual style I'd grown to love. She looked up from the stove and smiled with what I'd always interpreted as genuine joy at seeing me. "You're home early," she said, rising on her toes to kiss my cheek. "Perfect timing. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. The normalcy of the moment was surreal. Here was the woman who had just been exposed as a professional con artist, playing house like we were any ordinary couple at the end of an ordinary day. "How was your day?" I asked, settling into a kitchen chair and watching her move around the space that had once been Margaret's domain. "Good," she said, stirring something that smelled incredible. "I had classes this morning, then spent the afternoon at the immigration office. My permanent residency application is moving along nicely." The casual mention of permanent residency, the goal that would cement her legal right to remain in Canada, felt like a knife between my ribs. Of course, that was her endgame. Marriage to me was just the means to an end. Any calls from your family? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Her expression clouded slightly. Actually, yes, my cousin called this afternoon. There's been another emergency. Of course there had been. What kind of emergency? Her son was injured at school, fell from some playground equipment and broke his arm badly. They need surgery, and she trailed off looking genuinely distressed. I hate asking you for help again, Peter. I know you've already done so much for my family. How much? $2,000. But Peter, I can try to find another way. No, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I'll help. I always help, don't I? Her relief looked so genuine that for a moment I questioned everything Martin had shown me. This woman standing in my kitchen with tears in her eyes, worried about a child's broken arm. How could this be an act? But then I remembered the photographs of her with other men, the fake addresses, the non-existent family members, and I knew that her ability to appear genuine was exactly what made her so dangerous. Thank you, she said, coming to hug me. You have such a generous heart. I don't know what I did to deserve someone like you. That night I lay awake listening to Juanita sleep beside me and tried to figure out how to handle what I'd learned. Martin had advised against confrontation, but I couldn't imagine just pretending everything was normal while planning her exit from my life. I also couldn't ignore the fact that she was living in my house, had access to my bank accounts, and knew enough about my financial situation to cause serious damage if she chose to. The next morning, while Juanita was at her English classes, I called my bank and moved the majority of my assets into accounts she couldn't access. I also contacted my lawyer about updating my will and power of attorney documents, but it was the phone call from my daughter Sarah that forced my hand. Dad, I've been doing some research on Juanita, she said without preamble. I hired a private investigator. My stomach dropped. Sarah, I know you're going to be angry, but I had to. Something about her never felt right to me, and after Mom, I couldn't just stand by and watch if something was wrong. What did you find? Dad, she's married to someone else, right now, today. Some guy in Vancouver named Robert Chen. They got married 4 months ago. The room spun around me. Even after everything Martin had shown me, this revelation hit like a physical blow. Dad, are you there? I'm here, I managed. Are you sure? I have the marriage certificate. She's been married to this Robert Chen since January. While she's been living with you, planning a wedding with you, she's been legally married to another man. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, staring at the coffee mug Juanita had prepared for me that morning before leaving for her classes. Even that small kindness now felt like part of an elaborate performance. There's more, Dad. The investigator found records of at least 6 other men in different cities who've been sending money to various members of her family over the past 2 years. The amounts are staggering. How much? Over $200,000 combined. Dad, she's not just a con artist, she's running a full-scale operation. After I hung up with Sarah, I sat alone in the house that no longer felt like home and tried to process the magnitude of what I'd walked into. This wasn't a young woman who'd gotten in over her head or made some poor choices. This was a professional criminal who had studied me like a mark from the moment we met. When Juanita came home that afternoon, I was waiting in the living room with Martin's file and Sarah's evidence spread across the coffee table. Peter, she called from the entryway. I'm home. How was your... She stopped when she saw me, her expression shifting from casual warmth to something more guarded. Sit down, Juanita, I said quietly. We need to talk. She looked at the documents on the table and I watched her calculate her response. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. Then, just as quickly, the vulnerable woman I thought I knew returned. Peter, whatever this is, whatever someone has told you, I can explain. Which marriage certificate would you like to explain first? I asked, holding up the papers Sarah had sent me. The one to Robert Chen from January, or the two previous ones Martin found from her investigation? Her face went completely white. Who's Martin? A private investigator. A very thorough one. For several long seconds, we stared at each other across the room that had witnessed 8 months of what I'd believed was growing love and intimacy. I could practically see her mind working, trying to find an angle that would let her maintain control of the situation. Peter, she said finally, and her voice was different now, less accented, more controlled. You don't understand how complicated my situation is. Then explain it to me. Explain the non-existent family members. Explain the fake emergencies. Explain the dance performance where you made 11 different men believe they were special to you. She moved to the couch and sat down, but there was nothing vulnerable about her posture anymore. She looked like a woman calculating her next move. You want the truth? She asked. I think I deserve it, don't you? The truth is that everything I told you about my feelings was real. The truth is that yes, I've had to make compromises to survive in a country where I have nothing and no one. The truth is that wealthy Western men like you have privileges I can only dream of, and sometimes survival requires taking advantage of those privileges. Survival, I repeated. Is that what you call stealing over $200,000 from men who trusted you? Stealing? Her voice turned sharp. I provided companionship, affection, cultural education. I made lonely men feel special and appreciated. How is that different from any other service industry? Because you lied about everything, your name, your family, your situation, your feelings. Did I lie about my feelings? She asked. And for a moment, something that might have been genuine emotion flickered across her face. Peter, what I felt for you was real, even if the circumstances weren't entirely honest. You're married to another man. Marriages of convenience, legal documents to secure immigration status, they don't mean anything emotionally. They mean you committed fraud. They mean everything you told me about building a future together was a lie. She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. What happens now? She asked finally. Now you pack your things and you leave. Tonight. And you never contact me again. And if I don't? Then I call the police, immigration authorities, and the newspapers. I have enough evidence to destroy whatever operation you're running here. She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected this outcome. The money I've sent to your family. There is no family, Peter. At least not the way I describe them. The money went to pay for this lifestyle, to fund the operation, to buy the costumes and rent the venues that make the whole thing convincing. The casual way she said it, like she was explaining the operating expenses of any small business, made me feel sick. You're a sociopath, I said. I'm a survivor, she corrected. You have no idea what it's like to be a young woman from a poor country trying to build a life in places like this. You were born with advantages I'll never have. All I did was find a way to level the playing field. By preying on people who were grieving, who were lonely, who were vulnerable. By providing a service to people who wanted to feel special and were willing to pay for that feeling. She stood up and smoothed her dress, suddenly looking like a businesswoman concluding a meeting. I'll be packed within the hour, she said. And Peter? Despite what you think you know about me, what I felt for you was different from the others. If circumstances had been different, if I hadn't needed to be someone else to survive, maybe things could have been real between us. I watched her walk up the stairs to pack her belongings, and I honestly couldn't tell if that final statement was one last manipulation or a moment of actual truth. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. Juanita left that evening with 2 suitcases and a dignity that was almost admirable under the circumstances. She didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't make threats or promises. She simply packed her things, called a taxi, and disappeared from my life as smoothly as she'd entered it. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. For the first time in 8 months, I was alone in my house with no one to perform for, no one to convince of my worthiness, no one to rescue from manufactured crises. The quiet felt both liberating and terrifying. I spent the next 3 days cleaning, Not just the physical spaces Juanita had occupied, but the digital traces of our relationship. I deleted photos, threw away gifts, changed locks and passwords. I wanted to erase every reminder of how thoroughly I'd been fooled. But you can't delete memories, and you can't change the fact that you willingly participated in your own deception. Martin called on the fourth day with an update. "She's gone," he said. "Cleared out of her other apartment, closed the bank accounts we identified, disappeared completely. My guess is she's moved operations to another city, possibly another country." "What about the other men? The ones she was working simultaneously?" "Most of them don't know yet. The guy in Vancouver who married her, Robert Chen, he has no idea about you or any of the others. She's been maintaining separate identities with remarkable precision. Someone should warn them. Someone should. But Peter, you need to think carefully about how public you want to make this. Getting involved in a criminal investigation means depositions, court appearances, media attention. Your name will be attached to this story permanently. I thought about my children, my friends, my business reputation. Did I really want to become known as the man who got conned by a Thai romance scammer? But then I thought about Robert Chen in Vancouver, probably having the same conversations with Juanita that I'd had. I thought about the silver-haired gentleman from the theater, the man with the roses, the others who were still sending money to non-existent family emergencies. "Contact them," I said. "All of them. They deserve to know. And the authorities. Contact them, too. This needs to stop." The next few weeks were a blur of interviews with police, immigration officials, and fraud investigators. The scope of Juanita's operation was even larger than Martin had initially discovered. She'd been running similar schemes in Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and Montreal simultaneously, with different identities and backstories for each location. The financial damage was staggering, over $400,000 from dozens of men, all of whom fit the same basic profile: recently widowed or divorced, financially stable, emotionally vulnerable. But it was meeting some of the other victims that really opened my eyes to what we'd all been through. Robert Chen was a 62-year-old engineer whose wife had died of Alzheimer's after a 10-year decline. He'd married Juanita because she convinced him she was pregnant with his child, a pregnancy that mysteriously ended in miscarriage shortly after the wedding, but not before he'd paid for extensive medical care and family support. George Morrison, the silver-haired man from the theater, was a retired teacher who'd sent over $50,000 to various members of Juanita's fake family. He'd been planning to fly to Thailand to meet her parents when the investigation reached him. Each story was heartbreaking, and each man carried the same shame I felt: the embarrassment of having been so completely fooled by someone we trusted. "How did we all miss the same red flags?" George asked during one of our group meetings with investigators. "Because she was a professional," the lead detective explained, "and because she targeted people who were primed to want exactly what she was offering: connection, purpose, the feeling of being needed and valued." The detective was a woman in her 40s named Linda Rodriguez, and she specialized in romance fraud cases. "This isn't about intelligence or education," she continued. "Some of the smartest people I know have fallen for similar schemes. It's about emotional vulnerability and sophisticated manipulation." "But how do we forgive ourselves?" Robert asked, voicing what we were all thinking. Detective Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "By understanding that healing from this kind of betrayal isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it doesn't matter. It's about learning to trust your instincts again, rebuilding your confidence, and finding ways to channel your desire to help people into relationships and situations where that help is genuine and reciprocated." 6 months after Juanita disappeared from my life, I was sitting in the same poolside bar in Hat Yai where I'd first met her. It wasn't a pilgrimage or an attempt to recapture something. I'd returned to Thailand to testify in an international fraud investigation that had grown to include law enforcement agencies from 3 countries. Juanita had been arrested in Bangkok, along with 2 other women and a man who had been running similar operations across Southeast Asia. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and the Thai authorities were taking the case seriously. I was scheduled to fly back to Toronto the next morning, and I decided to spend my final evening at the place where this entire nightmare had begun. Maybe it was masochistic, but I needed to close the circle somehow. "Excuse me, are you Peter Caldwell?" I looked up from my beer to see a Thai woman approaching my table. She was probably in her 30s, casually dressed, with an expression that seemed nervous but determined. "Yes," I said cautiously. "My name is Siraporn," she said. I worked with Juanita. Not in the way you think," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "I was her friend from university. I knew what she was doing, and I tried to stop her." She asked if she could sit down, and against my better judgment, I agreed. "I want to apologize," she said once she was seated, "for what she did to you and the other men, for not doing more to stop her." "Why are you telling me this?" Siraporn was quiet for a moment, looking out at the sunset that painted the sky in the same impossible colors I remembered from my first night here. "Because you weren't the only victim," she said finally. "Juanita was destroying herself too, the woman you met, the woman you fell in love with. Pieces of her were real. But she got so lost in the lies, so consumed by the game, that she forgot who she actually was." "Are you asking me to feel sorry for her?" "No. I'm asking you to understand that sometimes people become monsters because they're running from monsters. Juanita's parents really did die in a car accident. She really was alone and desperate. But instead of finding healthy ways to build a life, she chose to become a predator." Siraporn reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. "This is who she was before," she said, sliding it across the table. "We were roommates at university. She was studying to be a teacher, like you heard her mention. She wanted to work with children to make a difference." The photograph showed a young Juanita laughing with a group of friends at what looked like a graduation celebration. Her smile was genuine, unguarded, full of hope and possibility. "What happened to that person?" I asked. "She made one bad choice, then another, then another. Each lie made the next one easier. Each successful scam made her more confident that manipulation was the answer to her problems." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to know that the connection you felt with her wasn't entirely fabricated. The woman in this photograph would have been capable of genuinely loving someone like you. But that woman got lost somewhere along the way." We sat in silence for several minutes, watching the sun disappear behind the horizon. "What will happen to her now?" I asked. "Prison, probably. Several years, given the scope of the charges. Maybe that will give her time to find her way back to who she used to be." "And what happens to the rest of us, the men she victimized?" Siraporn looked at me with surprising intensity. "You heal," she said. "You remember that your capacity to love and trust isn't a weakness, even when it gets exploited. You find ways to use your resources and your heart to help people who actually need and deserve it." After she left, I sat at that bar until it closed, thinking about everything that had happened over the past year and a half. The grief, the hope, the deception, the betrayal, the slow process of rebuilding my sense of self. When I returned to Toronto, I made some changes. I started volunteering with a local organization that helps legitimate refugees navigate Canadian immigration processes. I used my accounting skills to help people manage their finances during the transition to their new lives. I provided real help to real people who actually needed it. I also started dating again, carefully, honestly, with full disclosure about my experience and what I'd learned from it. Not because I was trying to replace what I'd lost, but because Detective Rodriguez had been right. Healing meant learning to trust my instincts again. 8 months later, I met Elizabeth Chen, no relation to Robert, at a grief support group for people who'd lost spouses to cancer. She was a retired nurse whose husband had died 2 years earlier, and she was struggling with the same questions about starting over that had consumed me after Margaret's death. Our relationship developed slowly, built on honesty rather than fantasy, grounded in shared experience rather than manufactured crisis. When Elizabeth had problems, real problems, with her grown children or her health or her finances, I helped because I wanted to, because I cared about her, because that's what partners do for each other. The difference between authentic love and professional manipulation, I learned, isn't always obvious in individual moments, but over time, real relationships create space for both people to be whole, flawed, honest humans. Fake relationships require one person to remain perpetually grateful and the other to remain perpetually perfect. Elizabeth and I married last spring in a small ceremony attended by our children, our friends, and the community we'd built together through volunteer work and shared interests. It wasn't the passionate whirlwind I'd experienced with Juanita, but it was something better. It was real. The night before our wedding, Elizabeth asked me if I regretted what had happened in Thailand. That's a complicated question, I told her. I regret the pain, the deception, the money I lost. I regret that other men went through the same thing. I regret that Juanita chose to become someone who hurt people instead of someone who helped them. But I don't regret that it taught me the difference between being needed and being loved. I don't regret that it forced me to rebuild my life more intentionally. And I don't regret that it led me to work with refugees, which led me to the grief support group, which led me to you. Elizabeth smiled and took my hand. So you're saying I should send Juanita a thank you note? Let's maybe skip that part. Now, as I finish telling you this story, I want you to understand something important. This isn't a warning to never trust anyone, never fall in love, never help people in need. The world is full of authentic people deserving of love and support. This is a reminder that real love, the kind worth having, doesn't require you to rescue anyone. It doesn't depend on constant crisis or perpetual gratitude. It doesn't ask you to ignore red flags or dismiss your instincts. Real love grows slowly, survives honest conversation, and creates space for both people to be human. If someone in your life is making you feel like you need to choose between love and common sense, choose common sense. Love that requires you to abandon your judgment isn't love at all. And if you've been where I was, if you've fallen for someone who turned out to be something else entirely, know that your capacity to care isn't your weakness, it's your strength. Don't let one person's dishonesty convince you to close your heart to everyone else. Before I go, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel and leave a comment about your own experiences, either with romance scams or with learning to trust again after betrayal. Your stories might help someone else who's struggling with the same questions I faced. And remember, the best revenge against people who prey on kindness isn't becoming cruel yourself. It's learning to direct your kindness more wisely and never letting someone else's darkness convince you to dim your own light. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.